We stand today at the crossroads of conscious will and unconscious compulsion, where the habits we repeat in daylight are but echoes of deeper, older voices within. To master them, we must descend into the caverns of the psyche, where the roots of our behaviors coil like serpents around the pillars of instinct. The concept of the shadow, as developed by Carl Jung, represents the hidden, unconscious aspects of the psyche, those parts of ourselves that we deny, repress, or refuse to acknowledge. These repressed elements often consist of desires, fears, traumas, and impulses that society deems unacceptable or that our conscious mind finds too uncomfortable to face. When these aspects remain buried in the unconscious, they do not simply disappear. Instead, they exert influence over our behavior in indirect and often destructive ways. Bad habits are one of the most common manifestations of the shadow at work. They emerge as compensatory mechanisms, attempts by the unconscious to fulfill neglected needs or express suppressed emotions in ways that bypass conscious control. Consider the habitual smoker who reaches for a cigarette not out of simple addiction, but as a way to soothe an underlying anxiety he has never fully confronted, or the chronic procrastinator who delays important tasks not because of laziness, but because of a deep-seated fear of failure or even success that she has never examined. These behaviors are not random. They are symbolic acts, expressions of something deeper within the psyche that has been pushed aside. The shadow does not communicate in rational language. It speaks through impulses, compulsions, and repetitive behaviors that seem irrational on the surface, but carry meaning when examined closely. Breaking a bad habit, then, cannot be achieved through willpower alone, for willpower operates at the level of the conscious mind, while the habit itself is rooted in the unconscious. A person may resist a habit temporarily, only to find it returning with even greater force later, because the underlying psychic tension remains unresolved. The only way to truly dissolve a bad habit is to bring the shadow material into the light of consciousness, to confront what has been repressed and integrate it into the broader self. This process is not about eliminating the shadow, for that is impossible. The shadow is an intrinsic part of human nature. Rather, it is about making the unconscious conscious, transforming blind compulsion into self-awareness. Integration begins with honest self-observation. One must ask, what does this habit provide that I am otherwise denying myself? What fear or desire is it attempting to manage? A man who habitually overeats may discover that food serves as a substitute for emotional nourishment he feels is missing in his life. A woman who compulsively checks social media might find that the habit masks a deeper loneliness or fear of irrelevance. These realizations are uncomfortable, for they force us to acknowledge vulnerabilities we would rather ignore. Yet it is only by facing them that we can begin to dismantle the habit's power. The next step is dialogue with the shadow, not suppression, but engagement. Jungian psychology often employs techniques like active imagination, where one consciously interacts with unconscious figures in a meditative or imaginative state. In the context of habits, this could mean mentally confronting the part of oneself that drives the behavior, understanding its motives, and negotiating a new way forward. For example, if anger has been repressed and leaks out in passive-aggressive habits, one might explore where that anger comes from and how it can be expressed constructively rather than destructively. Integration also requires replacing the habit with a more conscious alternative that addresses the same underlying need. If a bad habit serves as a coping mechanism for stress, simply removing it without providing a healthier outlet will leave a vacuum which the psyche will rush to fill with another compulsion. Thus, the work is not just stopping a behavior, but transforming it into something that serves the whole self, rather than just the shadow. This process is neither quick nor easy. The shadow resists exposure, for it thrives in secrecy. There may be resistance, relapse, and periods of frustration as old patterns reassert themselves. But each moment of awareness weakens the habit's grip, for consciousness is the antidote to unconscious repetition. Over time, what was once an automatic behavior becomes a conscious choice. And eventually, when the underlying conflict is resolved, the habit loses its necessity altogether. The ultimate goal is wholeness. A habit rooted in the shadow is a symptom of fragmentation, a sign that some part of the self has been exiled and is seeking expression. By bringing these elements into awareness, we do not just change our behaviors, we become more complete. The energy once spent on repression or compulsive repetition becomes available through creativity, growth, and deeper engagement with life. The shadow, when integrated, ceases to be an enemy and instead becomes a source of strength, for it contains not just our weaknesses but also untapped potentials that we have disowned. This is why the struggle with bad habits is so universal and so persistent. They are not mere flaws to be corrected, but messengers from the unconscious, pointing toward the parts of ourselves we have neglected. To ignore them is to remain at war with ourselves. To confront them is to move toward inner unity. The path is difficult, but the reward is not just the cessation of a bad habit. It is the discovery of a fuller, more authentic self. The human psyche is not a monolithic structure, but a dynamic interplay of forces, some striving for order and others pulling toward chaos. Carl Jung's concept of archetypes, universal primal patterns of behavior and perception, helps illuminate why we struggle with habits. Among these archetypes, the wise old man and the eternal child represent two fundamental energies that shape our relationship with discipline. The wise old man embodies structure, foresight, and self-mastery, qualities essential for building good habits. In contrast, the eternal child thrives on spontaneity, pleasure, and unrestrained impulse, the very currents that feed bad habits. Yet Jungian psychology does not advocate the total suppression of one in favor of the other. True discipline is not the tyranny of order over chaos, but the sacred balance between them, a dialogue between wisdom and wildness that prevents rigidity on one side and recklessness on the other. The wise old man archetype manifests in habits of consistency, delayed gratification, and long-term vision. When we wake early to exercise, resist distractions to work, or save money instead of indulging, we are channeling this energy. This archetype does not demand perfection, but conscious choice, the recognition that small, repeated actions accumulate into meaningful change. It is the voice that asks, what will serve my future self, rather than what do I crave right now? Cultures across time have revered this archetype in figures like the elder, the mentor, or the ascetic, those who have mastered their impulses to embody higher principles. Yet the danger lies in over-identification with this archetype, which can lead to cold rigidity, a joyless mechanization of life where discipline becomes punishment rather than guidance. On the opposite pole, the eternal child archetype rebels against structure. It is the part of us that resists alarms, skips routines, and whispers, just one more, whether it's another drink, another hour scrolling, or another day of procrastination. This archetype is not inherently negative. It is the source of play, creativity, and the ability to surrender control, all vital for a full life. But when left unchecked, it devolves into chaotic impulsivity, where immediate desire overrides deeper intention. Modern society often exacerbates this imbalance, with instant gratification available at every tap, feeding the child's hunger while starving the wise old man's wisdom. The result is a fractured self, swinging between extremes of indulgence and guilt, never finding equilibrium. The tension between these archetypes explains why so many habit-building efforts fail. Relying solely on the wise old man's discipline creates unsustainable pressure, a brittle structure that shatters when willpower wanes. Conversely, surrendering to the child's whims leaves us adrift, perpetually starting over but never progressing. The solution lies in negotiation, not domination. The wise old man must acknowledge the child's needs, rest, joy, spontaneity, rather than denying them outright. A rigid exercise regimen that ignores fatigue will collapse. One that includes rest days and adaptive movement endures. Similarly, the child must learn to respect the wise old man's wisdom, recognizing that some limits enable freedom rather than restrict it. A writer who schedules time for playful drafting the child alongside structured editing the wise old man harnesses both energies without stifling either. This balance is mirrored in myth and alchemy. The king and the fool, the sage and the trickster, even the sun and the moon, these pairs represent the eternal dance of order and chaos. Alchemists sought not to destroy base elements but to transmute them, just as we must transmute raw impulse into directed action. A bad habit is often a misdirected archetypal energy, the thrill-seeking of the child expressed destructively through excess rather than constructively through adventure. The work is not to eliminate the impulse, but to redirect its expression. The gambler's love of risk might find healthier expression in entrepreneurship. The binge eater's craving for comfort might shift to cooking nourishing meals. Psychological integration here is practical. Begin by identifying which archetype dominates your habits. Are you overly rigid, fearing any lapse as failure? Or are you endlessly permissive, treating every whim as a command? Then create structures that honor both. A student might balance focused study, wise old man with scheduled breaks for creative doodling, eternal child. A dieter might pair nutritious meals with occasional mindful treats, avoiding the binge purge cycle of deprivation and rebellion. The key is to ritualize the balance, making it a conscious practice rather than an accidental compromise. Ultimately, this interplay is the essence of sustainable discipline. The wise old man provides the map, but the child reminds us why the journey matters. Without the child, discipline becomes a prison. Without the wise old man, freedom becomes meaningless. To master habits is to orchestrate these forces, letting each speak in its turn, but neither rule unchecked. In this balance, habits cease to be battles and become instead the natural rhythm of a life lived fully structured, yet spontaneous, purposeful, yet playful. The struggle with habits, then, is not a flaw, but an initiation, a call to mature, not by rejecting our primal selves, but by elevating them into harmony. The human mind does not respond to brute force or sterile repetition. It thrives on meaning. This is why habits, when stripped of their symbolic weight, often feel hollow and unsustainable. We approach them mechanically, relying on sheer willpower to push ourselves forward, only to find our resolve crumbling when motivation fades. But what if the secret to lasting change lies not in treating habits as mundane tasks, but in recognizing them as modern rituals, repetitive actions infused with deeper psychological significance? Carl Jung understood that rituals are not empty ceremonies. They are psychic technologies, bridges between the conscious and unconscious mind. A ritual transforms the ordinary into the sacred, elevating a simple act into something that resonates with the soul. When we reframe habits in this light, they cease to be chores and become acts of self-creation, imbued with intention and purpose. Consider the act of waking early. For many, it is a struggle fought with alarms and groaning reluctance, a battle against the body's resistance. But in monastic traditions, the pre-dawn hour is not merely about productivity. It is a sacred time, a threshold between darkness and light, silence and speech. The monk who rises before the sun does not do so out of obligation, but because the act itself carries meaning. It is a daily rebirth, an alignment with cosmic order. When we approach our own morning routines with this mindset, the same action, waking early, shifts from a grind to a symbolic gesture, a way of honoring the potential of a new day rather than merely getting a head start. The ritualistic dimension transforms effort into devotion, making discipline feel less like deprivation and more like a dialogue with something greater than ourselves. This is why willpower alone fails. Willpower is a finite resource, a muscle that tires. But symbolic meaning is inexhaustible. It draws energy from the unconscious, from the archetypal currents that have guided human behavior for millennia. A smoker trying to quit through sheer grit will white-knuckle his way through cravings until exhaustion sets in. But if he reframes the act of quitting as a rite of passage, a severing of an old identity to make way for a new one, the struggle takes on a mythic quality. Each craving becomes not just a withdrawal symptom, but a test of resolve, a trial by fire. The cigarette is no longer just a nicotine delivery system. It is a temptation symbol, a relic of an older self. In this way, the habit's power shifts from the physical to the psychological, where it can be confronted and dissolved through awareness rather than suppression. Rituals also function as containers for transformation, providing structure for chaos. Anxiety, boredom, and excitatory drift often fuel bad habits. The mind, unmoored from meaning, grasps for quick anchors in distraction or compulsion. A ritualized habit acts as a bulwark against this drift. The writer who lights a candle before working signals to her unconscious that this time is sacred, that the act of creation is not just typing but consecration. The athlete who performs the same warm-up routine before training is not just preparing his body. He is entering a psychological arena, a space where focus is non-negotiable. These small ceremonies create a threshold between the mundane and the intentional, a buffer against the pull of inertia. The key lies in personalizing the ritual, ensuring it speaks to your inner symbolism. A corporate executive might find meaning in dressing meticulously each morning, not out of vanity, but as an embodiment of professionalism, a daily reaffirmation of his role. An artist might begin each session by arranging her tools in a specific order, a silent invocation of the muse. Even something as simple as brewing tea mindfully can become a ritual if done with presence, a momentary return to the senses amid the rush of life. The action itself is secondary. It is the intention behind it that charges it with power. This approach also reveals why bad habits are so hard to break. They too are rituals, just ones that serve unconscious shadows. The after-work drink is not just about alcohol. It is a ceremony of release, an attempt to mark the transition from labor to rest. The endless scrolling before bed is not just procrastination. It is a ritual of avoidance, a way to delay facing the solitude of night. To replace these, we must offer the psyche equally potent alternatives, actions that fulfill the same symbolic need but in healthier ways. The drinker might substitute his cocktail with elaborate tea ritual, preserving the act of transition without the harm. The scroller might replace the phone with a journal, turning avoidance into reflection. Ultimately, the ritual lens transforms habit building from a mechanical process into a mythic journey. Each time you perform your ritual, whether it's a morning run, a moment of meditation, or a nightly review, you are not just checking a box. You are reenacting your values, etching them into your nervous system through repetition and reverence. The habit becomes not something you do, but something you are, a living symbol of the self you are choosing to become. This is why rituals have endured across cultures and epochs. They are the alchemy by which humans turn intention into being. To master your habits, then, is not to conquer yourself, but to converse with yourself, to infuse the daily grind with the sacred, and in doing so, awaken the deeper currents that make discipline effortless. The alchemists of old were not merely primitive chemists. They were psychologists of the soul, laboring over their flasks and furnaces in search of something far more precious than gold. Their endless cycles of dissolution and coagulation, of breaking down and rebuilding, mirrored an inner process of transformation. What they sought outwardly in metals, they were cultivating inwardly in their own being. This ancient wisdom holds a profound key for understanding habits. Repetition is not mindless routine, but the very mechanism of psychological and spiritual evolution. When we engage consciously with our habits, we are not just modifying surface behaviors, we are participating in the alchemical art of individuation. Jung's term for the lifelong process of becoming who we truly are. Each repeated action is like the turn of an alchemical vessel, slowly distilling our fragmented impulses into something more whole, more authentic, more gold-like in its essence. Consider how a river carves a canyon, not through a single violent act, but through the patient, persistent repetition of water flowing over stone. So too does the psyche shape itself through habitual thoughts and actions. The neural pathways in our brains physically reorganize themselves through repetition, a biological echo of the alchemical process. But this is not merely mechanical adaptation. It is meaningful formation. When we choose to repeat a conscious action, whether it's pausing before speaking in anger, returning to the meditation cushion each morning, or consistently turning away from an old addiction, we are not just building a habit. We are sculpting our inner architecture, rewriting the narratives that govern our lives at the deepest levels. The alcoholic who resists a drink today is not just avoiding alcohol, he is reforging his identity at the level of being. This perspective transforms our understanding of setbacks. In alchemy, the process was never linear. Substances had to be broken down repeatedly, subjected to fire and solution over and over before any transformation could stabilize. So too with our psychological work. What we call relapses or failures in habit formation are actually necessary iterations in the alchemical process. Each time we return to the practice after faltering, we are not starting over. We are deepening the work, bringing more awareness to what previously operated unconsciously. The dieter who succumbs to a binge, but then reflects honestly on what triggered it, has gained something more valuable than perfect adherence: self-knowledge, that most precious alchemical substance. The repetitive nature of habit formation serves another crucial function. It wears grooves in consciousness. Just as a ritual repeated often enough becomes sacred through its very repetition, so too do our daily practices accumulate meaning beyond their surface appearance. The morning pages written by an aspiring author may feel meaningless in isolation, but over months and years, this repeated act becomes a container for creative becoming. The runner's daily mile transforms from exercise into meditation, then into identity. I am someone who runs, which eventually matures into I am running. There comes a point where the habit is no longer something we do, but something we are. So thoroughly has repetition dissolved the distinction between action and act. This alchemical view also reveals why conscious presence is essential to meaningful repetition. The alchemist who mechanically repeats his procedures without observation or intention will never achieve the magnum opus. Similarly, mindless repetition of habits going through motions without awareness produces only hollow routine, not transformation. True alchemical repetition requires that we show up fully each time, bringing fresh attention to what might seem like the same old. The pianist practicing scales is not just playing notes. She is listening, adjusting, refining. The meditator returning to the breath is not just killing time. He is training awareness itself. In this light, boredom, that frequent saboteur of habits, is revealed as resistance to the present moment, a refusal to meet the work with the depth it demands. The soul work of habit formation becomes most evident when we examine what happens at the threshold moments, those points where we must choose between the old pattern and the new. Here in the crucible of decision, the alchemy becomes visible. Each time we resist the easy, familiar path in favor of the chosen, evolving one, we perform a micro-act of self-creation. The smoker who passes on a cigarette is not just avoiding nicotine, she is actively sculpting a non-smoker's psyche. The procrastinator who begins the dreaded task is not just crossing an item off a list, he is rewriting his relationship with time itself. These small repeated choices are where the base metal of automatic living gets transmuted into the gold of authentic being. Ultimately, this alchemical perspective redeems habit formation from the realm of mere self-improvement and places it squarely in the domain of soulcraft. Our repetitions are not just about building better behaviors, but about answering the most fundamental human questions. Who am I? What am I becoming? The habits we cultivate or fail to cultivate are the daily votes we cast in the election of our own identity. When we approach them with this depth of understanding, even the most mundane routines take on cosmic significance. Making the bed becomes an act of ordering one's universe. Preparing a healthy meal transforms into an honoring of the temple. The daily review of expenses shifts from accounting to stewardship of one's life energy. In this light, the frustration we often feel with our habits, the sense of going in circles, the apparent lack of progress, reveals itself as initiation rather than failure. The alchemist knew that true transformation cannot be rushed, that the work demands its own time. Our impatient modern minds want quick results, but the psyche operates on deeper rhythms. When we commit to conscious repetition, we are not just waiting for change, we are participating in mysteries, the slow revelation of our own depth. The habit is both the path and the destination, the process and the product. Each repetition is at once an act of becoming and a revelation of what has already become. This is the paradox at the heart of all true alchemy, that by faithfully performing the work, we discover the work was already complete within us, waiting only to be revealed through our faithful repetition. Thus, when we approach our habits as soul work rather than behavior modification, we touch something ancient and found. We join the lineage of alchemists and seekers who understood that repetition is not the opposite of transformation, but its very medium. The flask is our daily life, the fire is our attention, and the gold we seek is nothing less than our own fully realized being. In this way, the smallest habit, performed with consciousness and consistency, becomes a sacred act, a single note in the grand opus of becoming who we are meant to be. And so, my friends, we arrive at the heart of the matter. Habits are not just routines, but rituals of becoming. They are the alchemical fires where base instincts are refined into golden discipline, where chaos and order dance in sacred balance, and where the unconscious whispers of the shadow are brought into the light of awareness. To build good habits and break bad ones is not a battle of willpower, but a journey of soul work, a patient, cyclical process of repetition, reflection, and renewal. Like the ancient alchemists, we must learn to trust the slow transformation, knowing that each conscious choice, each small repetition is another turn of the flask, another step toward wholeness. Thank you for allowing me to share these thoughts with you. May luck, or better yet, awareness guide your steps. Your habits become prayers, your routines become rites, and your life an ever unfolding masterpiece of conscious creation.